Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I will be ranking the 7 remaining Miss Marple short stories. These are the stories not included in the 13 Problems slash Tuesday Nightclub collection, which I ranked nearly 2 years ago now. And I have to be honest, I wish I structured my short story rankings differently. I was going collection by collection, but then it gets weird because short stories appear in multiple collections or not in some collections, in some editions, and it gets very just weird and disorganized. And I wish I just ranked all the Miss Marples in one go, but I didn't. So these are the stragglers, and I know this is weird and sort of arbitrary, and I wish I thought this through better at the time, but I didn't. And at some point, I will rank every Christie short story in one list. I still have so many to cover before I get there. There's, I think, 153 short stories, but there are only 20 with Miss Marple. And this list contains the 7 not previously covered on the channel. And there may be spoilers ahead. I mean, there's one story in particular that's very difficult not to spoil, but I'll warn you when it's coming. And before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. Starting out at number 7, the least good of these short stories, and I'm using the term least good because these are all pretty good. There isn't a bad one in this bunch. It's not even like an average one. I would say these are all above average. But at number 7, I have The Case of the Caretaker. Technically, there's also the case of the caretaker's wife. They're really the same story. The case of the caretaker is an expanded version of the caretaker's wife. So I did not feel the need to rank both of them. They're basically the same story. And I think this one does suffer a little bit because this short story was expanded into Endless Night. And as a result, this story does feel a little bare bones. I can't help but to make the comparison to Endless Night, but the story itself is still pretty good. It's basically Endless Night. Miss Marple is sick in bed when Dr. Haydock brings her the story to keep her occupied, and it just feels a little stripped down, but it does have, all the little intricacies of Endless Night, minus one of them. And, I like the idea of Miss Marple sick in bed, as she is wont to be on occasion. I still think the story is good, but I do think it falls short in comparison to the other short stories. I also feel there are times where it does seem like the action sort of skips ahead a bit. We don't get necessarily a fully fleshed out story. So that's why I have to put The Case of the Caretaker here at number 7. At number 6 is a short story from the Double Sin and Other Stories collection, and that is Sanctuary, also weirdly called Murder at the Vicarage, not to be confused with The Murder at the Vicarage, the novel. And this story gives us the return of Bunch and Julian Harmon from A Murder is Announced. A man is yelling Sanctuary dies in the vicarage, as you might guess. No one knows him, and no one knows what he meant by Sanctuary. And Miss Marple naturally gets involved and solves it, and I do find this story to be delightful. I think it's a nice, quick, and enjoyable read, but I think it lacks a little something special. I never think about Sanctuary a lot. Can't really, just off the top of my head recall, oh, that moment from the story. And, all the ones above this, I think, are really just top tier short stories. I think they're all more enjoyable and have twistier, more classic solutions. This one is fine for sure, but it's not one that I think resonates with me. I never think about this short story. I think it gets lost in the larger collection of short stories, even the smaller Miss Marple grouping. But it does have some fun moments with Miss Marple and Bunch continuing on from A Murder is Announced. But again, I think Sanctuary falls victim to just the other stories being better, so it lands here at number 6. At number 5, a bit of a weird one. Not that most of these aren't weird for one reason or another, but at number 5, I have Miss Marple Tells a Story, also called Behind Closed Doors, which is a bit of a spoiler, to be honest, but it's not the worst spoiler title on this list. And what makes this one unusual is that it was originally a radio play. Agatha Christie narrated as Miss Marple, which makes her the first Miss Marple performer, I believe. I don't recall there being a copy of Agatha Christie's voice, narrating the story is still in existence. I have not heard of it. So if it's out there, let me know. But because this story was not created to be in written form, the written story does seem a bit strange at times. There isn't a lot of description, for instance, certainly not to the extent you would expect. And I decided not to let that harm my analysis here too much. It does affect it a bit because the four above this don't have that issue and are just as good or better. But this is such like a quintessential Miss Marple story. A man is accused of murdering his wife in a hotel, and Miss Marple is asked to help him. The story involves quite a few Miss Marple staples, like her focusing on the help, her being underestimated, and her listening to other people who talk too much and thus reveal too much, her noticing the things people don't say. But the truth is, the top four stories also do all of these things and are written in a more traditional way that is easier to read and just a little bit better, I would think. So, Miss Marple Tells a Story comes in at number 5. And at number 4, we have A Treasure Hunt, and that is Strange Jest, also called A Case of Buried Treasure. And I think you could argue this one should be below Miss Marple Tells a Story. And I did originally have it there, but I did move it up. I think the idea of Miss Marple finding buried treasure is a bit odd and sort of like out of her milieu, but the way the plot unfolds is very much in her wheelhouse. I love her dealing with this like young couple who come to her because they are ignorant and they think this will be fun and easy and quick. And a lot of the clues and the character work are just very Marpelian or Marple-lite in nature. On the other hand, I don't find the story very unique. We have quite a few of these like missing wills, missing treasure, missing jewel sort stories, and they kind of blend together. And as much as I enjoy Strange Jest, I just think it's a very strong Miss Marple story, but I still think the ones above it are stronger. So Strange Jest comes in at number 4. At number 3 is an incredibly frustrating short story for reasons that will become apparently clear very soon, and that is The Tape Measure Murder. And just as a warning here, I'm going to spoil this one quite a bit here. I won't say who the murderer is, but let's be honest, this title is a major spoiler onto itself. I have no idea why it's called this. It does have a rarely used title called The Case of the Retired Jeweler, which is better, but I have to be honest, I never even heard of that alternate title before. I had never seen it before, even when I did my video on the Agatha Christie titles. I did not see it. I only saw it when I was researching for this video. And just to be clear here, I'm not holding the title against the short story. I'm only assessing the actual story. And this is a very good short story. Miss Hartnell, one of St. Mary Mead's busybodies, who I think is criminally underused, finds the murdered body of a woman strangled with an unknown object. And if you can read the title, you might be able to figure out what this object might be and just who might be using that object. But having all of that aside, I really like this story. It's another of those husband murdered the wife, but can Miss Marple prove him innocent and save him from the gallows? But this story has a lot of complexity to it. It's probably the most complex on this list up to this point, and it actually has a lot of content. I really think this could easily have been expanded into a full-length novel with not many changes needed. There is a lot to go with here, and we have all of the delight Miss Marple always brings. But the reason I don't have this higher is because I'm not exactly sure how solvable this is on its own. It is solvable for sure, but the title, does a lot of work and it sort of denies you the ability to solve the murder on your own. I remember the first time I read this, I saw exactly what was happening here, though I did think maybe it's a bit of a red herring, but spoiler alert, it's not a red herring. So it is a little hard to assess, but I still think this is a fantastic short story here at number 3. At number 2, we have a story with a weird publication history, and that is Greenshaw's Folly. And this is a weird story for its history. It's a bit complicated. Christie wrote this for a church fundraiser, but she originally had Poirot in it, and it was called Greenshaw's Folly, and that became Dead Man's Folly because the story wasn't usable. None of this is relevant to my assessment, just a fun little factoid here of Agatha Christie lore. And I think this one can be best summed up as a more complex version of Miss Marple Tells a Story. No, it's not like an expanded version of that. It's a different story, but it does have sort of the same plot points and a lot more fleshed out, a lot more character work, Raymond West is heavily involved here, and naturally Miss Marple has to help because he can't do anything on his own. This might be the most we see of Raymond West and his wife outside of the 13 Problems. We don't actually see a lot of him. We hear a lot about him. We don't see him a lot. And the mystery is very complex for a short story, and it contains a lot of classic detective fiction tropes. We have a lot of gardening references, which is just so Miss Marple. I really think this is a top tier short story. I really have no notes on this other than maybe it's just a little too complicated plot wise. I don't know if anyone would commit murder in this way, but again, you should be willing to suspend some belief for the sake of the story, and this doesn't really require that much suspension of belief anyway. So Greenstraw's Folly comes in at number 2. And at number 1 is a short story that I just think fits Miss Marple perfectly, and that is The Case of the Perfect Maid. And this isn't actually a murder mystery one, but the story is factory made to be the most ideal Miss Marple story ever. It involves maids, one of whom is named Gladys, because there has to be a maid named Gladys. There's also a jewel theft. It is Miss Marple doing what she does best. Gladys had been fired for allegedly stealing a brooch from her employer, and Miss Marple tries to prove her innocent. And we have so many fun thoughts from Miss Marple about maids and how she doesn't really like Gladys, but she knows she's not a thief. This is, by the way, a different Gladys than the one from A Pocket Full of Rye. They are two different people. We also have everyone obsessing over this new perfect maid in St. Mary Mead, and naturally Miss Marple is just so suspicious of this, and she does her usual Miss Marple thing of pretending to be a silly old lady and asking nosy questions and dropping sticky candy all over the place, which is one of my favorite Miss Marple tactics. That might actually be my favorite Miss Marple tactic, her dropping candy all over the place. There's actually a lot of characters in this story, despite it being pretty short. And it doesn't feel like too much. We don't get overwhelmed with all these characters. They all actually serve a role and are pretty fleshed out, at least for a short story. I have no notes, honestly. This is a near perfect short story, and I think you could argue something like Greenshaw's Folly or even like the tape measure murder are more complex and harder to pull off. But I think the mechanics of The Perfect Maid are just as strong. Like, I don't assess a non-murder story differently because there's no murder. You don't get points for having a murder as long as the non-murder story still has a mystery than this one does. And I think The Perfect Maid is just so well suited for Miss Marple that this was the clear number one choice for me. I didn't really consider another option. And this is probably number one of all the Miss Marple short stories, in my opinion. It is excellent. And The Case of the Perfect Maid comes in at number 1. And that is it for this video. Let me know in the comments what your favorite of these Miss Marple short stories are. And again, I do apologize for deviating from the schedule a bit here. This week was supposed to be the asking AI questions about detective fiction, but as I explained last week, my plans for that video were not going too well, so I need to rethink it a bit. And also, it was 4th of July, the week I was working on this, and I needed a really short video to make because I went on vacation and I had lots of things to do, so I just wanted to get like a quick video out, something that I could write in like one day. So this is that video instead. And next week we are continuing on our journey, our world travels through mystery fiction. With this time, we are heading to New Zealand's South Island with someone who is very much not on vacation. That would be Roderick Allen in Dyed in the Wool by Niall Marsh. Fantastic story here. Very clever and interesting. I always like the way the body is found in a wool bale. So stay tuned for that. Until next time, Mystery Files.